Moses rescued from the water. Jochebed took a little boat fashioned out of bulrushes, daubed it with pitch on the outside, and lined the inside with clay. The reason she used bulrushes was because they float on the surface of the water, and she put pitch only on the outside to protect the child as much as possible against the annoyance of a disagreeable odor. Over the child, as it lay in the little boat, she spread a tiny canopy to shade the babe. On it were written the words, "Perhaps I shall not live to see him under the marriage canopy." And then she abandoned the little boat on the shores of the Red Sea, but it was not left unguarded. Her daughter Miriam stayed nearby to discover whether a prophecy she had uttered would be fulfilled. Before the child's birth, his sister had foretold that her mother would bring forth a son that would redeem Israel. When Moses was born, and the house was filled with brilliant light, Amram kissed her on the head, but when he was forced to abandon the child, he beat her on the head, saying, "My daughter, what has become of your prophecy?" Therefore, Miriam stayed and strolled along the shore to observe what would be the fate of the babe, and what would become of her prophecy concerning him. The day the child was abandoned was the 21st of the month of Nisan, the same on which the children of Israel later, under the leadership of Moses, sang the song of praise and gratitude to God for the redemption from the waters. The angels now appeared before God and spoke, "O Lord of the world, shall Moses, who is appointed to sing a song of praise to you on this day in Nisan, to thank you for rescuing him and his people from the waters? How can it be that he shall find his death in the waters today?" The Lord replied, "You know well that I see all things. The contriving of man can do nothing to change what has been resolved in my mind. They do not attain their end who use cunning and malice to secure their own safety and endeavor to bring ruin on their fellow men. But he who trusts me in his peril will be conveyed from the profoundest distress to unlooked-for happiness. Thus, my omnipotence will reveal itself in the fortunes of this child." At the time of the child's abandonment, God sent scorching heat to plague the Egyptians, and they all suffered with leprosy and boils. Thermutis, the daughter of Pharaoh, sought refuge from the burning pain in the waters of the Nile. But physical discomfort was not her only reason for leaving her father's palace. She was determined to cleanse herself of the impurity of the crude idol worship that prevailed there. When she saw the little boat floating among the weeds on the surface of the water, she supposed it to contain one of the little children exposed at her father's order, and she commanded her handmaids to fetch it. But they protested, saying, "Oh, our mistress, it happens sometimes that a decree issued by a king is ignored, but it is observed at least by his children and the members of his household. Do you desire to transgress your father's edict?" Just then the angel Gabriel appeared, seized all the maids except one, whom he permitted the princess to retain for her service, and buried them in the bowels of the earth. Pharaoh's daughter now proceeded to do as she wanted. She stretched out her arm, and although the ark was swimming at a distance of 60 ells, she succeeded in grasping it, because her arm was lengthened miraculously. No sooner had she touched it than the leprosy afflicting her departed. Her sudden restoration led her to examine the contents of the ark, and when she opened it, her amazement was great. She beheld an exquisitely beautiful boy, for God had fashioned the Hebrew babe's body with peculiar care, and beside it she perceived the Shekinah. Noticing that the boy bore the sign of the Abrahamic covenant, she knew that he was one of the Hebrew children, and mindful of her father's decree concerning the male children of the Israelites, she was about to abandon the babe to his fate. At that moment, the angel Gabriel came and gave the child a vigorous blow, and he began to cry aloud, with a voice like a young man's. His vehement weeping touched the princess, and in her pity she resolved to save him. She ordered an Egyptian woman to be brought to nurse the child, but the little one refused to take milk from her breast, as he refused to take it from one after another of the Egyptian women fetched there. Thus, it had been ordained by God that none of them might boast later on and say, "I suckled him that holds conversation now with the Shekinah." Nor was the mouth destined to speak with God to draw nourishment from the unclean body of an Egyptian woman. Now, Miriam stepped into the presence of Thermutis, as though she had been standing there by chance to look at the child, and she spoke to the princess, saying, "It is vain for you, O queen, to call for nurses that are in no way related to the child. But if you will order a woman of the Hebrews to be brought, he may accept her breast, seeing that she is of his own nation." Thermutis then told Miriam to fetch a Hebrew woman, and with winged feet, speeding like a vigorous youth, she hurried and brought back her own mother, the child's mother, for she knew that none present was acquainted with her. The babe took his mother's breast and clutched it tightly. The princess committed the child to Jochebed's care, saying in these words, which contained an unconscious divination, "Now he is yours. Nurse the boy henceforth, and I will give you 2 pieces of silver as your wages." The return of her son, safe and sound, after she had exposed him, was Jochebed's reward from God for her services as one of the midwives that had bidden defiance to Pharaoh's command and saved the Hebrew children alive. By exposing their son to danger, Amram and Jochebed had effected the withdrawal of Pharaoh's command, enjoining the extermination of the Hebrew men children. The day Moses was set adrift in the little ark, the astrologers had come to Pharaoh and told him the glad tidings that the danger threatening the Egyptians on account of one boy, whose doom lay in the water, had now been averted. Then Pharaoh called a halt to the drowning of the boys of his empire. The astrologers had seen something, but they knew not what, and they announced a message, the importance of which they did not comprehend. Water was, indeed, the doom of Moses, but that did not mean that he would perish in the waters of the Nile. It had reference to the waters of Meribah, the waters of strife, and how they would cause his death in the desert before he had completed his task of leading the people into the promised land. Pharaoh, misled by the obscure vision of his astrologers, thought that the future Redeemer of Israel was to lose his life by drowning, and to make sure that the boy whose appearance was foretold by the astrologers might not escape his fate, he had ordered all boys, even the children of the Egyptians, born during a period of 9 months, to be cast into the water. On account of the merits of Moses, the 600,000 men children of the Hebrews begotten in the same night with him, and thrown into the water on the same day, were rescued miraculously together with him, and it was therefore not an idle boast, if he said later, "The people that went forth out of the water on account of my merits are 600,000 men." The infancy of Moses. For 2 years, the child rescued by Pharaoh's daughter stayed with his parents and kindred. They gave him various names. His father called him Heber, because it was for this child's sake that he had been reunited with his wife. His mother's name for him was Jekuthiel, because she said, "I set my hope on God, and he gave him back to me." To his sister Miriam, he was Jared, because she had descended to the stream to alter his fate. His brother Aaron called him Abi-Zanoan, because his father, who had cast off his mother, had taken her back for the sake of the child to be born. His grandfather, Kohas, knew him as Abi-Geter, because the Heavenly Father had built up the breach in Israel when he rescued him, and thus restrained the Egyptians from throwing the Hebrew men into the water. His nurse called him Abi-Sokol, because he had been kept concealed in a tent for 3 months, escaping the pursuit of the Egyptians. And Israel called him Shemaiah ben Nathaniel, because in his day the Lord would hear the sighs of the people and deliver them from their oppressors, and through him he would give them his own law. His kindred and all Israel knew that the child was destined for great things, for he was barely 4 months old when he began to prophesy, saying, "In days to come I shall receive the Torah from the flaming torch." When Jochebed took the child to the palace at the end of 2 years, Pharaoh's daughter called him Moses, because she had drawn him out of the water, and because he would draw the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt in a future day. And this was the only name God called the son of Amram, the name conferred on him by Pharaoh's daughter. He said to the princess, "Moses was not your child, yet you treated him as such. For this I will call you my daughter, though you are not my daughter." And therefore the princess, the daughter of Pharaoh, bears the name of Bethiah, the daughter of God. She married Caleb later on, and he was a suitable husband for her. As she stood up against her father's wicked counsels, so Caleb stood up against the counsel of his fellow messengers, sent to spy out the land of Canaan. For rescuing Moses and for her other pious deeds, she was permitted to enter paradise alive. That Moses might receive the treatment at court usually accorded to a prince, Bethiah pretended that she was with child for some time before she had him fetched away from his parents' house. His royal foster mother caressed and kissed him constantly, and on account of his extraordinary beauty, she would not permit him to ever leave the palace. Whoever set eyes on him could not leave off from looking at him. Wherefore Bethiah feared to allow him out of her sight. Moses' understanding was far beyond his years. His instructors observed that he displayed better comprehension than usual at his age. All his actions in his infancy promised greater deeds after he should come to be a man. When he was only 3 years old, God granted him remarkable size. As for his beauty, it was so attractive that frequently those meeting him as he was carried along the road were obliged to turn and stare at him. They would forget what they were doing and stand still a great while, looking after him, for the loveliness of the child was so wondrous that it held the gaze of the spectator. The daughter of Pharaoh, perceiving Moses to be an extraordinary lad, adopted him as her son, for she had no child of her own. She informed her father of her intention concerning him in these words, "I have brought up a child who is divine in form and of an excellent mind, and as I received him through the bounty of the river in a wonderful way, I have thought it proper to adopt him as my son and as the heir of your kingdom." And when she had spoken so, she put the infant between her father's hands, and he took Moses and hugged him close to his breast. Moses rescued by Gabriel. When Moses was 3 years old, Pharaoh was dining one day, with the queen, Elpharnanet, at his right hand, and his daughter, Bethiah, with the infant Moses on her lap, on his left, and Balaam, the son of Beor, together with his 2 sons, and all the princes of the realm, sitting at table in the king's presence. It happened that the infant took the crown from the king's head and placed it on his own. When the king and the princes saw this, they were terrified, and each one in turn expressed his astonishment. The king said to the princes, "What speak you, and what say you, O you princes, on this matter? And what is to be done to this Hebrew boy on account of it?" Balaam spoke, saying, "Remember now, O my lord and king, the dream with which you did dream many days ago, and how your servant interpreted it. Now, this is a child of the Hebrews in whom is the Spirit of God. Let not my lord the king imagine in his heart that being a child he did not know what he was doing. For he is a Hebrew boy, and wisdom and understanding are with him, although he is yet a child. And with wisdom he has done this, and chosen to himself the kingdom of Egypt. For this is the manner of all Hebrews, to deceive kings and their nobles, to do all things cunningly, in order to make the kings of the earth and their men stumble. Surely you know that Abraham their father acted so, when he made the armies of Nimrod, king of Babel, and of Abimelech, king of Gerar, to stumble. And he possessed himself of the land of the children of Heth, and the whole realm of Canaan. Their father Abraham went down into Egypt, and said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister, in order to make Egypt and its king stumble. His son Isaac did likewise when he went to Gerar, and lived there. His strength prevailed over the army of Abimelech, and he intended to make the kingdom of the Philistines to stumble, by saying that Rebekah, his wife, was his sister. Jacob also dealt treacherously with his brother, and took his birthright and his blessing from him. Then he went to Padan Aram, to Laban, his mother's brother, and he obtained his daughters from him cunningly, and also his cattle and all his belongings. And he fled away and returned to the land of Canaan, to his father. His sons sold their brother Joseph, and he went down into Egypt and became a slave. And he was put into prison for 12 years, until the former Pharaoh delivered him from the prison and magnified him above all the princes of Egypt on account of his interpreting the dream. When God caused a famine to descend on the whole world, Joseph sent for his father, and he brought him down into Egypt, his father and his brothers, and all his father's household, and he supplied them with food without pay or reward, while he acquired Egypt, and made slaves of all its inhabitants. Now, therefore, my lord and king, behold, this child has risen up in their place in Egypt, to do according to their deeds, and make sport of every man, be he king, prince, or judge. If it please the king, let us now spill his blood on the ground, lest he grow up and snatch the government from your hand, and the hope of Egypt be ended. Let us moreover call for all the judges and wise men of Egypt, that we may know whether the judgment of death is due to this child, as I have said, and then we will kill him. Pharaoh sent and called for all the wise men of Egypt, and they came, and the angel Gabriel was disguised as one of them. When they were asked their opinion in the matter, Gabriel spoke up and said, If it please the king, let him place an onyx stone before the child, and a coal of fire. And if he stretches out his hand and grasps the onyx stone, then we will know that the child has done with wisdom all that he has done, and we will slay him. But if he stretches out his hand and grasps the coal of fire, then shall we know that it was not with consciousness that he did the thing, and he shall live. The counsel seemed good in the eyes of the king, and when they placed the stone and the coal before the child, Moses stretched out his hands toward the onyx stone and attempted to seize it. But the angel Gabriel guided his hand away from it and placed it on the live coal. And the coal burnt the child's hand, and then he lifted it up and touched it to his mouth, and burnt part of his lips and part of his tongue. And for all his life he became slow of speech with a slow tongue. Seeing this, the king and the princes knew that Moses had not acted with knowledge in taking the crown from off the king's head, and they refrained from slaying him. God himself, who protected Moses, turned the king's mind to grace, and his foster mother snatched him away, and she had him educated with great care, so that the Hebrews depended on him, and cherished the hope that great things would be done by him. But the Egyptians were suspicious of what would follow from such an education as his. At great cost, teachers were invited to come to Egypt from neighboring lands to educate the child Moses. Some came of their own accord to instruct him in the sciences and liberal arts. By reason of his admirable endowments of mind, he soon excelled his teachers in knowledge. His learning seemed a process of mere recollecting, and when there was a difference of opinion among scholars, he selected the correct one instinctively, for his mind refused to store up anything that was false. But he deserves more praise for his unusual strength of will than for his natural capacity, for he succeeded in transforming an originally evil disposition into a noble, exalted character, a change that was further aided by his resolution, as he himself acknowledged later. After the wonderful exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, a king of Arabia sent an artist to Moses to paint his portrait, that he might always have a likeness of the divine man before him. The painter returned with his handiwork, and the king assembled his wise men, those in particular who were conversant with the science of physiognomy. He displayed the portrait before them and invited their judgment on it. The unanimous opinion was that it represented a man covetous, haughty, and sensual. In short, disfigured by all possible ugly traits. The king was indignant that they should pretend to be masters in physiognomy, seeing that they had declared the picture of Moses, the holy divine man, to be the picture of a villain. They defended themselves by accusing the painter, in turn, of not having produced a true portrait of Moses, or else they would have not fallen into the erroneous judgment they had expressed. But the artist insisted that his work resembled the original closely. Unable to decide who was right, the Arabian king went to see Moses, and he could not but admit that the portrait painted of him was a masterpiece. Moses, as he beheld him in the flesh, was the Moses on the canvas. There could be no doubt but that the highly extolled knowledge of his physiognomy experts was empty twaddle. He told Moses what had happened and asked him what he thought of it. Moses replied, "Your artists and your experts alike are masters, each in his line. If my fine qualities were a product of nature, I would be no better than a log of wood, which remains forever as nature produced it. Unashamed, I make the confession to you that by nature I possessed all the reprehensible traits your wise men read in my picture and ascribed to me, perhaps to a greater degree even than they think. But I mastered my evil impulses with my strong will, and the character I acquired through severe discipline has become the opposite of the disposition with which I was born. Through this change, wrought in me by my own efforts, I have earned honor and commendation on earth as well as in heaven." The youth of Moses. One day, after he was grown up and had passed beyond the years of childhood, Moses went to the land of Goshen, in which lived the children of Israel. There he saw the burdens under which his people were groaning, and he inquired why the heavy service had been put on them. The Israelites told him all that had befallen, told him of the cruel edict Pharaoh had issued shortly before his birth, and told him of the wicked counsels given by Balaam against themselves as well as against Moses when he was but a little boy and had set Pharaoh's crown on his head. The wrath of Moses was kindled against the spiteful adviser, and he tried to think of means of rendering him harmless. But Balaam, getting wind of his ill feeling, fled from Egypt with his 2 sons, and went to the court of Kykenos, king of Ethiopia. The sight of his enslaved people touched Moses to tears, and he spoke, saying, "Woe to me for your anguish! I would rather die than see you suffer so grievously." He did not look down on helping his unfortunate brothers at their heavy task as much as lay in his power. He dismissed all thought of his high station at court, shouldered a share of the burden put on the Israelites, and toiled in their place. The result was that he not only gave relief to the heavily laden workmen, but he also gained the favor of Pharaoh, who believed that Moses was taking part in the labor in order to promote the execution of the royal order. And God said to Moses, "You relinquished all your other occupations and joined yourself to the children of Israel, whom you treat as brothers. Therefore, will I too put aside all heavenly and earthly affairs and hold conversation with you." Moses continued to do all he could to alleviate the sufferings of his brothers to the best of his ability. He addressed encouraging words to them, saying, "My dear brothers, bear your lot with fortitude. Do not lose courage, and let not your spirit grow weary with the weariness of your body. Better times will come, when tribulation will be changed into joy. Clouds are followed by sunshine, storms by calm. All things in the world tend toward their opposites, and nothing is more inconsistent than the fortunes of man." The royal favor, which the king accorded him in ever-increasing measure, he used to lighten the burden laid on the children of Israel. One day he came into the presence of Pharaoh and said, "O my lord, I have a request to make of you, and my hope is that you will not deny it." "Speak," replied the king. "It is an admitted fact," said Moses, that if a slave is not afforded rest at least one day in the week, he will die of overexertion. Your Hebrew slaves will surely perish unless you accord them a day of rest from work." Pharaoh fulfilled the petition offered by Moses, and the king's edict was published in the whole of Egypt and in Goshen as follows: "To the sons of Israel, so says the king, do your work and perform your service for 6 days, but on the 7th day you shall rest. On it you shall do no labor. Thus shall you do at all times according to the command of the king and the command of Moses, the son of Bethiah." And the day appointed by Moses as the day of rest was Saturday, later given by God to the Israelites as the Sabbath day. While Moses lived in Goshen, an incident of great importance occurred. To superintend the service of the children of Israel, an officer from among them was set over every 10, and 10 such officers were under the surveillance of an Egyptian taskmaster. One of these Hebrew officers, Dathan by name, had a wife, Shelomith, the daughter of Debri, of the tribe of Dan, who was of extraordinary beauty, but inclined to be very loquacious. Whenever the Egyptian taskmaster set over her husband came to their house, on business connected with his office, she would approach him pleasantly and enter into conversation. The beautiful woman enkindled a mad passion in his breast, and he sought and found a cunning way of satisfying his lustful desire. One day he appeared at the break of dawn at Dathan's house, roused him from his sleep, and ordered him to hurry his detachment of men to their work. The husband, scarcely out of sight, he executed the villainy he had planned, and dishonored the woman, and the fruit of this illicit relationship was the blasphemer of the name, whom Moses ordered executed on the march through the desert. At the moment when the Egyptian slipped out of Shemoleth's chamber, Dathan returned home. Vexed that his crime had come to the knowledge of the injured husband, the taskmaster goaded him on with excessive vigor, and dealt him blow after blow with the intention to kill him. Young Moses happened to visit the place at which the much abused and tortured Hebrew was at work. Dathan hurried toward him and complained of all the wrong and suffering the Egyptian had inflicted on him. Full of wrath, Moses, whom the Holy Spirit had acquainted with the injury done the Hebrew by the Egyptian taskmaster, cried out to the latter, saying, "Not enough that you have dishonored this man's wife, you aim to kill him too?" And turning to God, he spoke, "What will become of your promise to Abraham, that his posterity will be as numerous as the stars, if his children are given over to death? And what will become of the revelation on Sinai, if the children of Israel are exterminated?" Moses wanted to see if someone would step forward and, impelled by zeal for the cause of God and for God's law, would declare himself ready to avenge the outrage. He waited in vain. Then he determined to act himself. Naturally enough, he hesitated to take the life of a human being. He did not know whether the evildoer might be brought to repentance, and then lead a life of pious endeavor. He also considered that there would be perhaps some among his descendants for whose sake their wicked ancestor might rightfully lay claim to clemency. The Holy Spirit allayed all his doubts. He was made to see that not the slightest hope existed that good would come either from the malefactor himself or from any of his offspring. Then Moses was willing to repay him for his evil deeds. Nevertheless, he first consulted the angels to hear what they had to say, and they agreed that the Egyptian deserved death, and Moses acted according to their opinion. Neither physical strength nor a weapon was needed to carry out his purpose. He merely pronounced the name of God, and the Egyptian was a corpse. To the bystanders, the Israelites, Moses said, "The Lord compared you to the sand of the seashore, and as the sand moves noiselessly from place to place, so I pray you to keep within yourselves the knowledge of what has happened here today. Let nothing be heard concerning it." The wish expressed by Moses was not honored. The slaying of the Egyptian remained no secret, and those who betrayed it were Israelites, Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Palu, of the tribe of Reuben, notorious for their effrontery and contentiousness. The day after the thing with the Egyptian happened, The two brothers began, with malice, to scuffle with each other, only to draw Moses into the quarrel and create an occasion for his betrayal. The plan succeeded admirably. Seeing Dathan raise his hand against Abiram to deal him a blow, Moses exclaimed, "You are a villain, to lift up your hand against an Israelite, even if he is no better than you." Dathan replied, "Young man, who has made you to be a judge over us, you that have not yet attained to years of maturity? We know very well that you are a son of Jochebed, though people call you the son of the princess. And if you attempt to play the part of our master and judge, we will spread around the thing you did to the Egyptian. Or perhaps you harbor the intention to slay us, as you killed him, by pronouncing the name of God." Not satisfied with these taunts, the noble pair of brothers took themselves to Pharaoh and spoke, "Moses dishonored your royal mantle and your crown." To which Pharaoh returned, saying, "Much good may it do him." But they pursued the subject, "He helps your enemies." But Pharaoh replied, as before, "Much good may it do him." Still they went on, "He is not the son of your daughter." These last words did not fail to make an impression on Pharaoh. A royal command was issued for the arrest of Moses, and he was condemned to death by the sword. The angels came to God and said, "Moses, the guest of your house, is under restraint." And God replied, "I will take up his cause." But, the angels urged, "His verdict of death has been pronounced. Yes, they are leading him to execution." And God again made reply, "I will take up his cause." Moses mounted the scaffold, and a sword, sharp beyond compare, was set on his neck 10 times, but it always slipped away because his neck was as hard as ivory. And a still greater miracle came to pass. God sent down the archangel Michael, disguised as the hangman, and the human hangman, charged by Pharaoh with the execution, was changed into the form of Moses. This spurious Moses the angel killed with the very sword with which the executioner had intended to slay Moses. Meanwhile, Moses took flight. Pharaoh ordered his pursuit, but it was in vain. The king's troops were partly stricken with blindness and partly with dumbness. The dumb could speak no information about the abiding place of Moses, and the blind, though they knew where it was, could not get to it. Next, the flight. End part 39 of 95, TheLegendsOfTheJews.com.